exciting, including today's guest. So we have Dr. Noémie Elhadad. Is that how I pronounce your last name? Okay,
Yeah.
awesome. Can we get there? They are. All right. So unfortunately, my guest is sick. So but I've been happy that they've been able to still agree to get to interview with me on stage. And so, how are you doing? How are you feeling?
Getting there.
Getting there. Okay, I won't try to take up too much of your time, but a quick introduction of my guest is that Dr. Noémie Elhadad is the chair of department at the Biomedical Informatics at Columbia University. Their research lies at the intersection of artificial intelligence, human-centered computing, and medicine. And today, I want to be discussing this new project that they're developing called Citizen Endo. So would you like to kind of introduce us to what this project, like an overview of what this project is?
Sure. So Citizen Endo is a project that aims to collect new types of data about a disease that is so far very not understood scientifically. The disease is called endometriosis. It's estimated to affect 1 in 10 women in reproductive age, so it's a fairly prevalent condition. But there's a whole lot of knowledge gaps about it. And because of those knowledge gaps, there are lag to diagnoses. Women wait on average 7 years to access a diagnosis and then potentially treatment. And it's an issue because the disease has a lot of debilitating symptoms, pain, infertility, and basically a lot of inflammatory component to the condition. And so the idea behind Citizen Endo was, the first step to studying diseases is to get data about diseases. And because a disease is very much related to the menstrual cycle and to changes in time, it felt like we needed new ways of collecting data that went beyond surveys that ask you, how are you doing? What are your symptoms? And really create a database that is scientifically amenable to analysis. And so we use principles of citizen science to engage patients in telling us about their disease and collecting data so that we can do, in my case, artificial intelligence and data science on them to identify new insights about the disease.
And endometriosis has been something that's been kind of like looming around, especially within like my friend group. Especially, it's now that we're in the stage of like family planning or whatnot. But it's always hard. Like we don't realize that you have it until it's kind of like, the symptoms are believed, or if you're trying to get pregnant, then you find out because of like some trials and tribulations that you can't get pregnant, that you actually have endometriosis. So why is it so difficult to diagnose or even take seriously?
Yeah, I think those are the way you're describing it is absolutely correct. Average age in the United States is late, is in the 30s, mid 30s, and one pathway to diagnosis is through infertility when people have been suffering for a while. And so there's many, it's very multifactorial, but I would say a big reason to why it takes so long to diagnose is this lack of awareness and this lack of knowledge about the disease. So women themselves are experiencing symptoms, but because menstruation is still a taboo, don't really talk about it. Uh, and so there's no patient-led kind of investigation. Although thankfully that is changing because it's becoming more and more of a household name in women's health. But there's also the fact that clinicians themselves are not good at identifying the disease. There's surveys of primary providers that show that they feel uncomfortable even identifying symptoms of endometriosis. And it makes sense because it's not well um, taught in medical schools. There's very little amount of time devoted to the disease. And again, it's confusing because we're talking about potentially 10% of women in reproductive age. Um, there's probably are ways to treat endometriosis. We just haven't found them because we haven't tried yet. And so, there's a lot of work to do here.
So it's interesting that you are taking like a citizen science approach to collecting this data. So in like a health tech space that we're in, where we have like the Aura Ring or apps that track your menstrual cycle, like how were you able to recruit people to be a part of this project, knowing that like they're sharing their health information?
Yeah. So we do it in a few ways. One is we're very patient-centered. We do a lot of qualitative work, focus groups, interviews, and go on online communities and talk with patients constantly to make sure that the technologies we're creating are aligned with what they expect the technology should do for them, to make our goals very transparent to them, and to make sure that we're being ethical in how we handle all of this data, because it's a lot of very intimate data. It's Any disease data is intimate and sensitive, but on diseases that are stigmatized, it's even more important to gain the trust of patients. And so we spend a whole lot of time doing this, and that's why citizen science was to us like a good way to get at this, was to be pretty much like bring the patients as partners rather than as study participants or objects that we study, and really say, what are we trying to achieve here as a community of patients, and how can we change the status quo? Um, Social media is a big way, but also working with patient advocacy groups, lots of patient events, working with foundations throughout the world. We're trying to, it takes a lot of time, and it sounds like it's like all this work to get some data to then do the data analysis, but it's not just an engagement technique. It shapes the questions, the scientific questions we're asking. And so it really delivers, I would say, as an approach, because I think we're asking the right questions. There's always this problem in science, right? Which is, once you have data, you still don't have a research question. And when there's so many gaps in knowledge, we need to prioritize. And again, getting the patients in the loop is one way to identify, I think, the right questions.
So what type of data are you collecting from the patients, or at least the partners instead of the patients? Mm-hmm.
Sure. So we created an app basically called Fendo, and the name means phenotyping endometriosis, but phenotyping endometriosis is a little long, and so we're calling it Fendo. Um, but it's basically what we call a self-tracking app, very much like you would have a MyFitnessPal or a menstrual tracker, where every day you go in, and you don't have to go every day on it, but it's up to you. We designed the app with patients, and so it asks questions that are directly relevant to the experience of endometriosis. Things like symptoms, but it's not only menstrual cycle symptoms. It's really, and we confirmed it with our research. It really is a systemic condition, and so we pretty much ask for how you're doing, like scanning from head to toe. A lot about self-management. What kind of medications are you taking? What kind of exercise are you doing? Are you experimenting with food and diets to help with your symptoms? Sleep quality, all sorts of things. We have just started incorporating wearables, which we know is going to bring a lot of useful information. I'm wearing my ring and my watch, as to experiment with all of this. And then we're trying a few things. One very exciting aspect of this community is that they're very open to experimentation and research. And so the latest thing we're trying is the use of recordings of your voice, to be able to see if there's any changes, not so much in what you talk about, but in the pitch and the tone and the signal of your voice. And could it help you, for example, detect that you're going to have a flare up like 2 days later? Very much like, on your watch, maybe your heart rate gets recorded, and you can see, I can tell you, because I'm sick right now, I could see my heart rate go up even before I had symptoms. And so we're looking for this signal that could help patients to be like, okay, maybe in 2 days I'm going to be unable to get out of bed. but I have time to change my schedule and maybe try a few things, take some painkiller in advance, or try to be proactive about it. So that's an example of question that came from patients, and we do work like focus groups again on these particular questions of like, what would it be useful? Would you want to record your voice? Are you worried about privacy? What do you want to do with the voice? Do you want to hear yourself back? People don't want to hear themselves back. But all of these questions are important to ask first before we go into saying we're just going to detect this thing and whatever works, we'll just do it.
So that goes back to like your partnership aspect of doing the citizen science, where you are collaborating with them, pretty much like asking permission of like, okay, we're thinking about this. Are you okay with this? Consenting,
That's
and then like
exactly
moving
right.
forward. Awesome.
That's exactly right.
With and you mentioned earlier that like the whole point, or you are ensuring that you want to be transparent of like how you're using the data. So like what exactly is the plan? Like, you mentioned that you're doing AI or machine learning. So like what would be the ultimate goal in analyzing this data?
Yeah. So we're asking a few things out of it. The first one we asked was, can we just describe the disease from a scientific standpoint? We have all of these lived experiences, and there's also a journal entry in the app, and people are writing, and it's really fascinating to read, and we're very humbled actually to read all of these human stories. But what we're primarily interested in is, for now, can we complete the picture of endometriosis? Right now, it's understood as a surgical condition, something where you get surgery, you get lesions of endometriosis, biopsied, you analyze them with in the pathology department, and you can say it's deeply infiltrated or it's a cyst, and we found that these things do not correlate with the experience of the disease. So what does that mean? They're valid characteristics of the disease, they're just not the entire story. And so we wanted to start from basically in a very traditional way in which medicine is done, just describe a disease in order to define it and then study it. If we don't know that it's a systemic condition, that it's not just aligned, pain aligned with periods or something that is really related mechanistically to where your lesions are in your body, we might miss opportunity for treatment, for example, right? And so it's important that we have the complete picture of the disease, and so that's the first thing we asked was, can we identify subgroups of symptoms that seem to fit together and might indicate subtypes of the disease, for example. It's again, those are very traditional questions to ask when you have very common diseases. It's never a single disease, it's usually heterogeneous. And so that was the first question we asked, and we did found that there seems to be subtypes that are happening in there.
It kind of makes me think of like the olden days where it's just like with women's health, if something was happening, like, it's hysteria, she's crazy, she's insane, like send her into the yellow room. And so the fact that you're incorporating, because there could be debate of like this is anecdotal evidence, but the fact that you're putting data behind or like the numbers behind this to further support, like, okay, this is a whole picture of the symptoms rather than just like the pathology test that you're saying.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
That's exactly right. I think there's a tension between it's subjective and anecdotal, and we need this data because the numbers don't lie. And when you spend time standardizing and mapping and analyzing the data in a way that you can find patterns emerge, then I think we can start believing it. And in fact, that's what patients tell us, even individually. They tell us that they want to be able to print their own tracked information when they go to their doctor because it looks more objective than them telling how they feel to their doctor. And so I think you're totally onto something here with this idea of anecdotal to scientific evidence.
Yeah, it makes me think of, wait, I know you're supposed to be here. You're supposed to give a talk. Their talk was supposed to be called Suffering to Empowerment, which was creating clinical data about endometriosis with people. And I think that's what really captured me of like wanting to interview is the fact that, you have like the word empowerment into there of just like we have access, or we're they're being more in tune with their health by keeping track of it in a detailed way that gives them the power to kind of like when they go to the doctor be like, hey, like listen to me. But no, this is amazing. I have an awesome crowd. I'm going to open it up for questions as we kind of wrap out. Anyone have questions for Dr. Elhadad? We have one in the pink jacket. We have a mic. Hold on.
Making sure.
Oh, thank you. I was wondering how your study took into consideration like cross-racial differences, and if you saw consistencies among certain racial groups, knowing that some racial groups suffer more prominent symptoms from endometriosis and other reproductive diseases.
Yeah, thank you for your question. We actually just got 2 weeks ago a paper published in Nature Partner Journal of Women's Health on disparities in drug prescriptions in treatment of endometriosis. And what we find is actually fascinating to us. We looked at, so in this case, we did not look at our citizen endo data. We looked at very large amounts of data in claims data sets and electronic health record data. So this is real world patterns of care, if you want. And we found that prior to diagnosis, we could see disparities in how access to pain medication was provided between Black and white patients. We just looked at these two races. We did not do a multifactorial analysis. But then once there was access to the disease, to the diagnosis, this disparity reduced. The unfortunate fact is getting access to the diagnosis is another disparity where there's racial disparities. And so I think it's complicated. We definitely know that these disparities kind of confirm what we know in general about access to drug for different people of different races. It kind of felt good actually that like post-diagnosis, these disparities reduced. And I think it talks about the fact that we're dealing with a stigmatized disease, where at that point, once someone has a diagnosis, there's a bit more of like, okay, you believe the patient, they're in pain, and so you give them the drugs they need. And by the way, the study was not only on pain medication, but the biggest disparities pre-diagnosis were, as you can imagine, on pain medication.
Any other questions for our
Yep, we do. We have a couple.
Okay.
Hi, Anna Roberts Pilgrim. I'm an AAAS STPF, and I've done a lot of time in women's health. I'm curious, how many people do you have, giving you information on the citizens.gov website? What is the length of time that you have, the study time, and when do you hope to publish the information you find out? This is really interesting.
Yeah, thanks for those questions. So we have about 18,000 participants throughout. Don't quote me on the number, but I check them every day. Like I think we have 18,300 something participants in the app. We have been publishing since we had about 4,000 participants on these on how we analyze the data, and we don't republish our findings, but we always kind of rerun our analysis as we have more patients. Engagement of patients is really interesting. We have actually a paper on that, which is like, what do we need from patients for their data to be useful for analysis? Do you need to come and track your disease every day? Do you need to come once in a while? There's a lot of really interesting research question. Is engagement a kind of like a bias into the analysis? Are we finding that people who track less are different than people who track more? And the answer is we're not finding that. We're able to identify really, I want to say, like disease-specific characteristic rather than engagement characteristics with the app. On average, people use the app for a month, but we find that there's really 4 types of users. There's the ones who come in and then just come back very, very seldomly. and then we up to the ones who use it pretty much every day. Out of these 18,000, we have about 10,000 that are like highly active users, and that means more than 3 months of engagement.
Hi, I'm Julie Stallhut. I'm an alum of the Science and Technology Fellowship Program. And first, I want to thank you for, as somebody who's had experience of this disease, and also wondering if you are capturing data on age of onset or age of first symptoms from your patient population.
Yeah, that's a great question. We need to, because all of these, for many reasons. One is obviously a scientific question. We don't really know, does endometriosis always exhibit symptom in people, and people are not able to recognize that they have symptoms? Sometimes it's extreme and it's like, yeah, something is wrong, but not always. Or is it that it actually progresses and beyond the age of menarche, there's kind of a progression where it really starts later. So we need to ask people when they start getting symptoms. In addition to the app, there are established research instruments that are surveys. They're fairly long, but they're still useful. That are surveys that ask all of these questions, as well as like family history. There's a lot of, we know it's a hereditary disease to some extent. And so, who else in your family has had either dysmenorrhea, pain during menses versus actually diagnosed endometriosis, etc. So, yeah, all of these are really, really critical for us to collect.
All right, I think we have time for one more question if anyone has one. If not, we can wrap up. Nope. All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Noémie. This has been a very fruitful conversation. I really enjoyed this conversation, and for just taking time out of your sick morning to join us.
No, I'm glad I was able to do this. I wish I was there. So thanks for giving me the opportunity.
To catch us on the next year of the meeting. But thank you so much.
Absolutely.
I hope you have a good rest of your day, and thank you all for hanging out.